Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to join you for the very first Gatherverse Summit. I want to thank Christopher Lafayette and the whole team working behind the scenes to power this week's conference and bring us together. My name is Taryn Williams, and I am the Assistant Secretary leading the Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP. For those of you who are not familiar with ODEP, we are a sub-cabinet agency within the U.S. Department of Labor and report directly to the Secretary. Congress established ODEP 20 years ago to create a federal agency dedicated to working across policies, programs, and agencies to promote employment opportunities for people with disabilities. At ODEP, we believe collaboration is the root of progress, and that it is what brings me here today. I am thrilled to speak at the Gatherverse Summit because we share a mission to foster inclusion for all in evolving technological landscapes. Your global ecosystem of communities is gathering, documenting, and sharing human-centered approaches to make the metaverse inclusive for everyone. To leverage this powerful community, I want to focus our minds today on what it means to make the metaverse inclusive. How do we practice inclusion? What does that look like? I'm going to explore these questions by sharing examples from our work in the disability community. First, I should tell you that our agency is passionate about fostering collaborations that help make emerging technologies accessible. This work often comes with the bonus of making technology easier for everyone to use. All the immersive technology tools that enable the metaverse are no exception. Virtual, augmented, and mixed reality tools just work better when they're created accessible from the start. Examining technology through the lens of disability is also useful for broader movements for equity. People with disabilities exist across all racial, gender, educational, socioeconomic, and organizational lines. So designing for the most marginalized in our communities is a great strategy to advance change. As you engage in this week's sessions, I challenge you to consider all angles of equity, not just the ones that you understand personally. Ask yourselves, how can my piece of technology work for people with vision disabilities? How can my corporate culture ensure that hiring and advancement decisions are equitable for people of color? What can I do to make space for marginalized voices in the virtual meetings that have become so common in the age of COVID? Of course, the path towards inclusion is not always easy. It's okay to be in learning mode here. That's the value of vibrant meetings like the one Gatherverse is hosting this week. But as we go through the week, I encourage everyone to write down a few simple strategies that resonate with you. Take those back to your workplace and see what change you can build. To get us started, I want to share some concrete steps the federal government has been taking to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion across our agencies and across the United States. It's a commitment that comes from the very top. You may know that in June 2021, the Biden administration issued an executive order to advance inclusion in the federal workforce. What really excited me and my colleagues about that executive order was not just the content, but the terminology it used. It wasn't just about promoting diversity and inclusion, nor was it just about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, or DEIA. The executive order specifically mentions efforts to advance equity in the workplace for individuals with disabilities and to expand diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility training throughout the federal workforce. It was a refreshing, intentional effort to include the disability community in the EO's reach. And it's a model for including people with disabilities in our conversations about equity. Thanks to this model, the government is creating plans to embed DEIA in our culture. This means leadership is committed to meaningful inclusion. It means accessibility is more prominent than ever before. I'm happy to say that our agency has been making access, in particular accessible technology, a priority for many years. I described ODEP's mission earlier, and a key part of it means ensuring that technology works for employees and consumers with disabilities. ODEP is passionate about providing resources to help organizations adopt accessible technologies. We also offer guidance on using technology to foster equity and inclusion in the workplace. I'll share more about that in a few minutes. But first, I want to establish a shared vocabulary around DEIA. What do these terms mean in the context of technologies that enable the metaverse? Let me define our core values, the ones that make up DEIA, so you can bring this foundation into all your sessions this week. In our view, accessibility means that developers are designing technology to work for everyone right outside of the box. Users can interact with tools in many ways, regardless of ability. And technology can work better for everyone when it's accessible. For example, built-in accessibility features like speech to text on our smartphones help everyone, not just people with disabilities. This is simply good usability for all users. Similarly, we have a specific vision for equity and inclusion, which we can achieve when workplaces go beyond accessibility to ensure basic access is fair and just. Fairness principles guide how people use current and new technologies. When we make the same technology supports available to all diverse groups, regardless of disability, race, or gender. Now that we have some shared understanding around these terms, let's talk about why they matter in the first place. It's true that inclusion matters to Gatherverse because it's the right thing to do, but there's more to it. Accenture has found that companies that embrace best practices for employing and supporting more persons with disabilities in their workforce earn 28% higher revenue, double their net income, and have 30% higher economic profit margins than their peers. And because technology underpins so much of today's work environments, it's essential that organizations consciously choose tools that support an inclusive, accessible environment where people from underrepresented groups can thrive. Using inclusive technology can also reduce legal risks. Compliance is not the most important factor for our agency, but it can be a key motivator for employers. Some organizations, such as federal contractors and subcontractors, are required by law to proactively recruit and retain qualified people with disabilities. An accessible technology infrastructure can be critical for meeting requirements and avoiding penalties for non-compliance. Finally, using technology to promote inclusion can improve the quality of the products and services that your organization delivers. Using technology in a socially responsible manner isn't just the right thing to do. It will also help improve the product or service that your organization creates. That's because you'll become more likely to incorporate methods that perform best for all end users. In fact, that's a major tenet of universal design. These are just some of the main reasons to advance accessible and inclusive technology policies across your organizations. Now, with DEI firmly in hand, let's dive further into the metaverse. Gatherverse exists to get us thinking about how to make virtual gatherings more inclusive, which is something our agency has been doing for a few years. I'm going to share examples from our work making emerging technologies accessible, particularly immersive tools that lay the foundation for the metaverse. Another term we often use for immersive tools is extended reality, or XR. Some of you may be familiar with ODEP's signature Accessible Technology Initiative, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, or PEAT. PEAT works to create a future where accessible technology is standard in all workplaces. By focusing on equity and fostering collaborations across industry, government, and advocacy groups, PEAT addresses the root issue, designing and creating technologies with inclusion at the forefront, and people with disabilities involved in every stage. It's all in pursuit of PEAT's vision, a future where all the technologies are born accessible so that everyone can succeed in their careers. In the past, PEAT has focused on the accessibility of ICT, like websites, computers, and phones. But lately, we've expanded our focus to the accessibility of emerging technologies. We want to help organizations answer a simple question: how can workplaces be more accessible and inclusive, both now and in the future? Like you, we want a robust and competitive labor force today and in the future. Today's workforce is not at all what we envisioned. Today's workplace is not at all what we envisioned even 20 years ago. With work taking place on our phones and constant collaboration through electronic workspaces like Zoom and Teams. And if past is prologue, tomorrow's workplaces will be even more different, especially considering all of your efforts to bring the metaverse into reality. We're seeing hints of that future right now, of course. If the pandemic has shown us anything, it's that for many industries, the workplace itself is not a physical space. Rather, it's a digital one. So the COVID crisis has given us a glimpse into the future of the workplace and emphasized the accessibility imperative for our current and future workplace technologies. This is where immersive technologies come into play. Tools that will enable the metaverse, we're here to discuss. These innovations overlay and integrate representations of people, communication tools, and digital content into the physical environment. Whether viewed using a head-mounted display or using mobile devices, AR and mixed reality are changing the way digital content is accessed and experienced. XR is becoming a part of hybrid, physical, and digital workplaces. But we can't tap the full potential if these technologies are inaccessible to certain users. Just think about it. Because of their wearable and spatial nature, XR technologies must be designed to work for all different kinds of people in different kinds of situations and for different kinds of uses. This means the underlying technology must be accessible and inclusive for everyone, including people with disabilities. So to help foster inclusive XR development and adoption, our agency is releasing a new toolkit for businesses today. The Inclusive XR and Hybrid Work Toolkit helps businesses understand the value of using accessible XR technologies in hybrid work environments. After reading the toolkit, you'll better understand how to procure accessible XR technologies for your workplace and learn how to use these technologies in a way that includes all employees equally. Find it at peatworks.org. The time to address XR tools is now, before they saturate the marketplace with accessibility pitfalls. Before these technologies become even more commonplace, we need to work with their developers to ensure accessibility is considered in the early stages of the development life cycle. After all, it is far less expensive to build something accessible from the start than it is to retrofit accessibility fixes into a product after the fact. Just think of the famous blueberry muffin analogy. You've probably heard it before. You can't sprinkle blueberries on top of the muffins when they come out of the oven. They're a critical part of the recipe, and they need to be baked in from the start, just like accessibility. I also want to describe our work with XR Access, a community of technology experts, researchers, and policymakers committed to making XR tools accessible to people with disabilities. XR Access has expanded to include over 500 members across public, private, and nonprofit organizations in the last 3 years. It includes participation from Meta, Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, Verizon, and other leading companies. Here's a quick snapshot of the 3 work streams within XR Access and what they're accomplishing. First, the business case for XR Workstream is conducting a research project focused on XR workplace technology that is inclusively designed and how this technology is making hybrid workplaces more inclusive. Second, the inclusive design for XR Workstream is building an open source design framework for creating accessible, immersive technologies. This design framework includes research practices developed by our partners at the Inclusive Design Research Center in the Ontario College of Art and Design University. Finally, the accessibility development for XR Workstream is building an accessibility object model to include text descriptions in 3D environments. This is a valuable innovation to make XR environments more accessible for people with different disabilities. It can offer navigation cues to people with vision disabilities and provide helpful tips and scaffolded content for people with cognitive disabilities. So that's a look at ODEP's many efforts to help make the next generation of technologies accessible and inclusive for people with disabilities. For more information, I really encourage you to visit the PEAT website at peatworks.org. And my hope is that these examples will empower you all in the Gatherverse community to tackle all aspects of DEIA throughout your sessions this week. I want to leave you with one last point. Making technology accessible has been our bread and butter. but ensuring equal access to technology is just as important. It will take serious work to make the metaverse the ideal platform that we all envision. Potential barriers like affordability, digital literacy, and broadband access should also be on the agenda this week. These barriers could inhibit basic access to the metaverse. Here's what I mean. Hybrid workplaces require employees to have internet access, preferably reliable, high-speed broadband. Many jobs today also have internet-based applications. So how and where someone accesses the internet really matters. Broadband affordability matters. Digital literacy matters. And immersive technologies simply increase the urgency of these issues. To fully support hybrid workplaces, XR technologies rely on a robust national infrastructure that delivers high-speed broadband access to employees wherever they live. The internet is a key connector between physical and virtual spaces. That's why we're in contact with federal agencies that are working to expand broadband access using new investments from the bipartisan infrastructure deal that the Congress and the President enacted last year. The metaverse is exciting as long as it's inclusive. So let's pay attention to who's in the room designing technology and who it's designed for. Disability co-design will be key in making that happen. Making sure people with disabilities have a seat at the table, designing technologies that impact them. It's a concept reflected in the mantra of the disability community, nothing about us without us, and a key pillar of DEIA. Thank you again for inviting me to be a part of today's event, and let's get to work.